Chapter 7, Phonology 3, the sound patterns of language. This is the very last chapter we will be studying. Okay. When you look at slips of the tongue, there is further evidence for phonological rules happening. So, for example, when you have the unintended utterance of gone to seed, and it comes out as got to seen, what's happening is that the final consonants of the first and third words were reversed, right? And notice that the reversal of the consonants also changed the nasality of the vowels. So when you, instead of gone, when you say God, the nasality disappears. But when you say, instead of seed, you say seen, the nasality appears. So even if you say something wrong, the phonological rules still apply. Stick in the mud, smuck in the tid. Okay, same thing, nasality. Okay, smuck, stick. Okay, in the. Okay, what to notice here is that this T aspiration happens. Speech production becomes preach seduction. Well, that sounds very intriguing. Okay, so there was no aspiration here, but there is an aspiration here, right? And there is an aspiration here, and it disappears. So that's further clue that phonological rules are very much in operation everywhere. Okay, prosodic phonology. We talked about prosodic stuff a little bit. So when you talk about sounds, there are two parts for you to look at. The segmental sounds. Those are the individual sounds we have looked at so far. But if you go beyond that, you have suprasegmental sounds. That's beyond individual sounds. And those belong in the prosodic phonology section. So syllable structure belongs there. And a syllable, this is formal notation for a syllable. This means delta, right? Okay, it consists of an unset and a rhyme. Notice that this rhyme is different, spelled differently. Well, can I spell this? From this rhyme, but they actually practically mean the same thing. So Jack and Jill, the hill, water, after, down, crown. You see the rhyming happening here, and the rhyming is concerned about the rhyme section of a syllable. So there's the unset initial consonant sounds, and the maximum number of initial consonants that can happen in English is 3 consonants, and they're always in this kind of combination. Sibilant sound, invariably S, and p to k, and then L or R. And these are limitations. So you can say scratch, right? Stretch, or splash, but no other variations. And then the rhyming part has 2 parts. The nucleus. Nucleus is the highest. So that's what makes a syllable, and it's usually a vowel sound. Although sometimes a liquid sound like L and R, and even nasal sounds like M and N, can become the nucleus, form a syllable. So, and then there's a coda, that's the end. So splints is an example. So you can have a consonant cluster in the coda as well. So it's typically a consonant, which is an unset, and a vowel, which is the nucleus, and a vowel and another optional coda consonant. Put together, they become a rhyme, and then all together they become a syllable. Okay, let's look at word stress. Some words don't change their form, the derivation doesn't occur, but they can play 2 parts of speech, right? Pervert, pervert, as in my neighbor is a pervert. Don't pervert the idea. So same word is doing double duty. In this case, the stress is absolutely crucial, right? Because there is no other clue for you to know whether something is a noun or a verb. Subject. Let's change the subject, which is a noun. He'll subject us to criticism. Often when one identical word functions both as a noun and a verb, usually with nouns the stress is in the first syllable, with verbs the stress is toward the end. That's a good generalization. Let's look at primary and secondary stress. If you have ever studied French, you will know that this accent mark is called accent aigu, acute accent, and this is accent grave. It's the secondary stress. Primary stress, secondary stress. So resignation. I told you TION words has the penultimate stress, and resignation, okay, because there's no stress, gu doesn't disappear here, remember? Resignation, fundamental, linguistics, introductory, systematic, revolution. So that's penultimate, linguistics, penultimatory. That's two syllables before. Penultimate. So penultimate is pretty popular, but you know, sometimes speakers put stresses on different syllables. A very good example is laboratory. Is that how you spell it? Yeah. I just love it when British people say laboratory. Or controversy, we say controversy, and Brits say controversy, and it sounds just so fancy, right? Okay, phrase stress. So if you expand our horizon a little bit and go from a word to a phrase, something very interesting happens with compound nouns. Compound nouns can be compounding of anything. Usually the last element is a noun. We looked at it in morphology. Tightrope, right? Like acrobatic rope. Red coat, hot dog, White House, they all mean something other than just a combination of these two words. When you have compound nouns, the stress goes on the first syllable, and that's how we know that these are compound nouns, as opposed to just a regular old tightrope, okay? Because in this phrase, the head is the rope. The rope is more important than the descriptor, so the stress goes here. Red coat, coat is more important than the color of it. Hot dog, the dog is more important than how he feels. White House, the house is more important than the color. So isn't that very interesting? Identical words, if you just listen to it, you wouldn't know, because you don't even have the space in between words. But when you listen to it, you do know, because the stress shifts. Oh, did I skip over something else? Let's go back. Oh, okay. How about intonation? Intonation is like a pitch. In other words, it's like a pitch contour. So depending on where the stress lies, she is a doctor. That's the main stress in that word. So the whole sentence. English is a word final stress. The final content words usually get the stress. So it's sort of like she is a doctor. And then if it's a statement, it has a falling contour. But even if it's stated like a statement, she is a doctor, you're not saying is she a doctor, which naturally is a question. But even if you say she's a doctor, you can tell if it's a question by this rising intonation. She's a doctor, right? Same thing. How about tag questions? Tag questions are fascinating because the intonation changes everything. She's a doctor, isn't she? If you have a falling intonation, what it means is that I think she's a doctor, I'm pretty certain she's a doctor, and I want you to agree with me. Don't you think so? I am expecting you to agree. She's a doctor, isn't she? But if you say she's a doctor, isn't she? Okay, what do you sense? Still a little bit of a doubt. I think she might be a doctor, but I'm not entirely sure. So it's still a neutral question. Isn't that interesting? Okay, how about the sentence? Usually in English, the final content word gets the main stress, and the contour goes up and down like this. It's a statement. And English is very much like, if you were to ask a foreign person who doesn't know English and ask them to describe how it sounds to them, they would say ta-da, 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 ta-da. It's very reduced stress, like waves. Very iambic. This is the same thing. Tristram left directions for Isolde to follow, like that. Do you hear the wave? That's a typical sentence, right? Typical pitch contour. But sometimes you might want to emphasize something within the sentence. Let's say somebody might have heard it, but your voice was so soft. The person couldn't tell, so he might ask you, like, Tristan left what? Then you could say, Tristan left directions for Isolde to follow. Right? So it's a contrastive stress, which is unusual. This is the typical stress, typical intonation. This is a contrastive emphatic intonation. Very interesting stuff. How about sequential constraints of phonemes? Related to that, there is a concept called phonotactics, tactic touching, which sounds can touch each other is what it means. So not only there is a sequential constraints on which phonemes can come first and stuff like that, but there is constraints on which ones can come together. And this kind of knowledge, because I have studied linguistics, has helped me tremendously when I play Scrabble. I just look at my 7 letters and I can tell instantly if I can come up with an English-like word. So if you have played Scrabble, you will know that you try to invent a word, and you would, if you're brave enough, you would lay it on the board and you'd say to your opponent, like, if it's not a word, it ought to be, because it sounds so English, right? So that knowledge has helped me. So let's look at this. Let's look at B, E, K, L combination. And you would mostly, if you're given these 4 sounds and you're asked to make potentially English words, you'd probably come up with a blick, clib, bilk, which is a real word, kilb, stuff like that, right? These are the only permissible arrangements of these phonemes in English. Okay, and these lbki, ilbk, bkl, ilkp are not possible English words. So although blick and clip are not really English words, if you hear somebody say, I just bought a beautiful new blick, you would probably respond by saying, you just bought a beautiful what? As if you're the one who doesn't know the word blick and it does exist. But if somebody were to say, I just bought a beautiful new bukil, somebody else would respond by saying, what? Oh, no, I just messed it up, right? I just bought a beautiful new blick. You'd say, what's a blick? As if it's an existing word that you didn't know. I just bought a beautiful new bukil. I can't even say it. Then somebody would say, you just bought a beautiful what? I'm totally lost, right? Phonological analysis. Let's look at Finnish here. Look at the data. Notice that the sounds are here transcriptions and the meanings are always in quotation marks. Given these words, do the voiced alveolar stops to do represent different phonemes, or are they allophones of the same phone? Okay, remember which questions to ask to find out if 2 sounds are separate phonemes, they make a meaning difference, or they are just variations of the same phoneme. Okay, the first question to ask, are there any minimal pairs? Okay, I'm seeing some minimal pairs here. Madone, matone, and you cannot predict when D would happen, you cannot predict when T would happen, and they're not in complementary distribution, right? So they must be, T and D must be separate phonemes. Let's see another example. How about K, kate, kade? Okay, you cannot tell. They form minimal pairs. They're identical except in one regard, and that's the target sound we're looking at. Therefore, there are 2 separate phonemes. And another question, if you're not sure, is can you predict when T would occur and when D would occur? No, you can't. It almost seems random. So this one's very easy, right? So we can draw a conclusion that T and D in Finnish are 2 separate phonemes and not allophones of the same phoneme. Okay, Greek. Finally, consider these data from Greek, focusing on the following sounds. Okay, Okay, we don't have these sounds, so let me just briefly tell you. X is pronounced as, it's a voiceless velar fricative. We have k, voiceless velar stop. So it's very similar when you say k, except k, the back of your tongue kind of touches the velar soft palate area. But because it's a fricative, there is a friction and you make a very narrow tunnel. So it's, instead of k, you'd say k. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. How about voiceless palatal stop? Palatal is that bony area in front of the velar, ceiling of your mouth, and then make a stop sound, and voiceless. So it's something like, okay, no, I'm not sick, don't worry about it. Okay. Voiceless palatal. Fricative, it's the same thing, sedia, but it's fricative, so you make a very narrow tunnel and say no, I'm not a smoker, don't worry about me. Okay, so look at the data here and see if you can find any patterns. Okay, you don't really have enough time to look at it. I mean, you have to stare at it for a long time to figure out some kind of a regular patterning here. But the questions to ask are, any minimal pairs in which these sounds contrast? Obviously, that's the most important thing to figure out. Oh, this one, I see it instantly, right? Or these two, right? These two, they're minimal pairs. So k and x must be two separate phonemes, and c and sedia must be two separate phonemes. Good guesses, and you can find more. Are there any non-contrastive sounds in complementary distribution? Oh, maybe, but just by looking at it alone. Let's see, complementary distribution. Ooh, we decided that these are separate. Oh, it seems like here in front of high vowels, high frontal vowels, oh, here high. Ooh, that's very interesting. Low vowels or non-high vowels, it's sedia, right? Oh, am I saying that right? Back vowels and front vowels. Okay, front vowels, right? Front vowels. With front vowels, we seem to have these two sounds. And in front of back vowels, like O, right? Ah, we seem to have these two sounds. Oh, so between these two groups, there is some kind of complementary distribution going on. So if non-contrasting phones are found, what are the phonemes and their allophones? So now you need to match which two sounds make a family and which two sounds make a family. And what are the phonological rules by which the allophones can be derived? Okay, so these are the questions to ask. Okay, to summarize, so a lot of the work has been done with these two sounds. Let me change it to a pen. Felt tip, I like felt tip. And the color. Okay, this sound occurs between in front of these. Notice all these are back vowels, and these are back vowels and R sound. Okay, and these two occur before front vowels. Oh, seems like this covers more areas than this, so this should be easier to make into a rule, right? And these probably should be the default. And this kind of goes with other linguistic data in different languages. There is a tendency for the velar sounds, velar stop and velar fricative, to become palatal. They kind of, you remember velars further back than the palatal, and because in front of the frontal nouns, these consonants become move a little further front, so they become from velar to palatal. That kind of makes sense. So let's see. So linguists have decided that now they can state this palatalization rule. Palatalize velar consonants. So These two become these two before the front nouns. That makes sense, and it goes with other linguistic data. So using feature notation, we can state the rule as plus velar sounds become plus palatal sounds in the environment of minus back vowels. Right? That's it.